Hello and welcome to Jive Talk. I'm very happy to have a returning guest on Jive Talk tonight. It's Sturla Ellingvåg, who was the historian who contributed to the recent paper on Viking DNA and was a guest a month or so ago. But I'm not so happy to say that he has experienced some difficulties since then, which he's come on to talk about. And he'll also talk about some other aspects of the paper, which we didn't get a chance to go through last time because, there's so much to talk about. So without further ado, here is Sturla. Welcome back to Jive Talk. How are you doing?
Well, I'm doing well, thanks. But it's been a crazy few weeks since last time I was on your channel. Man, I gotta tell you. Yeah.
I bet. Yeah, the media have done a recent report on it, but it's in Danish language only. So a lot of the people watching won't actually know what's happened. Can you give us a rundown of the events that have happened since that last stream?
Well, the big picture is I was cancelled, basically, and deplatformed, and I had these horrible accusations. The very next day, not even 24 hours after I was on your channel. And I don't think it had that much to do with you or your channel. That was just sort of an excuse. But that brought sort of a little Viking warrior out inside of me, because I said, this is really unfair. And the problem is people in Denmark, where this paper was published from at the DNA lab of Professor Eske Willerslev. Now, they thought I was criticizing the paper, which they found unethical and unreasonable, since I am one of the co-authors, when in fact I wasn't. I was criticizing the way the results of the paper were being communicated to journalists, causing these crazy headlines like Scandinavians weren't Vikings at all, and Vikings came from Southern Europe, and everything needs to be rewritten. And then when you go further down in the same article, this is both in Danish, Norwegian, and in English, when you go further down, you meet some kind of professor who is distinguished that says, this paper pretty much confirms everything we know about the Viking Age. So you have these crazy headlines and some really strange quotes, and then you have a professor at the bottom says, it confirms everything you know about the Viking Age. So I found that to be rather counterproductive, because so many people got upset. And that's why I wanted to get on and tell my side of it as a historian. I didn't mean to criticize that much, especially the Professor Eske Willerslev. And he was the one who got mad. But the thing is, Tom, they didn't fire me because of that, because I was criticizing something, and they didn't give me any warning either. They just sent me a really short email, and they accused me of ties to I had been on that channel with ties to white extremists. And there I was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a false accusation that people use against me to say that that this channel is white supremacist, or that I'm white supremacist. But if you actually challenge anyone who makes that claim to provide a shred of evidence, they can't, because there is nothing I've never expressed anything remotely supremacist for any kind of saying that one people is better than another people. It's simply untrue. So that raises the question of why people try and do that. The simple answer is that they want an excuse to exclude people from public debate and from the public arena of discussion of history whose opinions they don't agree with. They don't want to actually engage with them. They want to remove them so that they don't have to have opposing views discussed, especially on their papers. So they want to have there's only the creators of these interesting new papers, and then the media, and they have just that's the only narrative. And although they don't have complete control over how the media portrays it, they have some control with the press releases. However,
I'll tell you this. I had a journalist at Denmark's most important newspaper, a conservative newspaper, to do a story. It was out the past Friday. And this journalist, she investigated very well, I think. She did some tough questions to Eskil Willerslev and to me, and she also had some questions to your channel and to you. And I sent those concerns she had over to you, and you replied to them very well, I think. And she took that into this article, and she decided not to do anything more out of that. And to me, I think just what you said now, and what you wrote to me, and that I passed on to this journalist, and the journalist saw that explanation you had, and why you have been, how do you say it, red flagged, the whole process there, and when someone has red flagged you, because I heard there was this organization that goes around red flagging and putting up this cancel culture, this list of names and organizations that you shouldn't work with and talk to. And I didn't know this, Tom. I didn't know that you were on this list. So the thing is,
you can't ever see this list. This was created. There was an attempt to get me blacklisted, we would say, by last year by an organization called Hope Not Hate, and they used as evidence hearsay of what a student who had allegedly heard in a pub, and it was completely false. And I had a lawyer threaten them with legal action for defamation for printing these lies, and they didn't publish a retraction, but they did retract the lies. However, some left-wing extremists on the internet continue posting them as if there was any evidence. And so it's that they talk about fake news and fake history. I believe in evidence, and I publish my sources. If anyone makes these kind of claims, ask them for a source. And if they use the source of a guy who heard some guy say something in a pub allegedly, then you can say that they are absolutely not a leg to stand on. That is not a source. That is not. That's not reputable. That's not evidence in an academic context. Hearing something in a pub. And they have no such, they know that they have no decent reason to cancel me, but they know that I have different worldview than them, and that's enough reason for them to want to have me completely removed from any public sphere of debate. And then even also what they want to make sure is that academics like yourself don't have discussions with me, because they want to build a wall between the controlled narrative and any opposing views that might pop up in it. So I think that's very sad. But because, especially as you pointed out, the main issue with misrepresentation of the findings in the paper comes from the mainstream media, because I haven't misrepresented anything in any paper. I just talk about what I find in papers, as do you, and you were just talking about problems that you were noticing in the mainstream media representation. Is that right?
Yes, I was part of the discussion, or there were many discussions, of course, with so many scientists or researchers involved in this Viking paper. But some of the discussions I was in was regarding what if we find something? There was one of the researchers, one of the more heavy researchers, if you can say that, distinguished, who wanted to ask the question to us others: what if you find something that's not so easy, so scientifically debatable, or well, basically not so politically correct? And the fear, in this person was that what if someone who is on the very far right politically, or some extremists want to use that? Should we then refrain from doing that? And we're getting to that, because we talked about that there are some words on phenotypes, selection, right, in the paper. And you can see there in the preprint, as you have, Tom, and also in the final paper, you can see the difference there. And that's the debate I'm talking about, actually. And right. I'm not going to name anyone who's been part of that discussion, but it was a well-funded discussion, and I was happy. And that's sort of the reason why I went out myself also in the media, like I did on your channel, because the thing was, one of the archaeologists that I have a lot of respect for wrote very clearly You should never avoid mentioning scientific facts for political reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
I agree with that.
And that is a quote from the debate that we had internally. And to me, that's very sound. It's very good. Eske Willerslev was in on it. I thought everyone was in on it.
Sounds good.
And then to my shock, I see what the headlines were. I see what some of the quotes were. And I think, this is not what we discussed on the email threads, and I have them. I looked over them just a few days ago, and I'm thinking, what has been going on there? Actually, basically, this one person who was so concerned, and he put up an ultimatum. I won't have my name on the paper if you go ahead with these 2 paragraphs on phenotypes.
Let's just quickly give everyone I just want to clarify what you're talking about, because the paper and the preprint have slightly different quotes about blondism. So the preprint just says that the rate of blondism in the Viking samples is pretty much exactly what it is in modern Scandinavia, but the paper, it paints a different story and focuses more on the higher prevalence of dark hair, and it's not based on different data. It's the same data. It just is presented very differently. And the media obviously went with an entire spin on that to try and make it seem like the Vikings were really very dark and very different to what Scandinavians are today, which isn't what the data is showing actually.
Because the unfortunate thing is also that I say, I'm a historian, so I'm not a geneticist here, but I was part of the discussions here. We found some both during the Viking Age and also earlier before the Viking Age, we found some genetic material, genetic flow into Scandinavia. And they asked us, the archaeologists and historians, to try to explain this. And of course, there are many theories on this. So in combination with gene flow coming into Scandinavia from Southern Europe during the Viking Age, and this blondism or the dark hair thing especially, those 2 has caused some headlines, like on CNN, was it? I think the Vikings weren't necessarily blonde or Scandinavian, or even worse in other headlines. And I was so shocked when I saw this, because I thought, what has been communicated? Because this is not what we discussed internally. And then I'm in a bit of a dilemma. Should I take, how do you call it in English, Tom? Dissents? That's what we call it in Scandinavia. When you don't agree with the result, you take a dissent. Is that an English word?
You dissent. You dissent. I'm not sure I know.
No, well, you agree, but you make a protest, in a sense.
Mm-hmm. I see.
And I decided to do that, but not to criticize the paper, although there are something to say about that gene flow into Scandinavia during the Viking Age, and we can do that later. But yes. I'd like to first just draw the really fast line of what's been going on in the past few weeks, because I'm sitting there, Tom, just after your interview, and I'm feeling very unfairly mistreated by someone really high up in the hierarchy, and in a very, very, I have to say, arrogant in a bad way. Suddenly I'm treated like I'm some sort of disease. I can't speak to any of the plus 90 scientists involved in this new project that we have. I'm out of a very exciting project in the Caucasus Mountains, but the scientists in Georgia, the team there, they refused actually, and they said, no, we want to have Sturla on. So now I'm actually in that project, but I'm
great.
Yeah, but I moved from Denmark to Tbilisi. And
Well, glad to hear the Georgians have got more sense than Danes.
Well, they're mountain people, and they are warrior people also, and they also like wine very much, and I've been there many, many times. So it's very easy to adapt to the culture for me for some reason. I don't know why. But so now I'm part of that project, ongoing project, but on the Georgian side. But I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, all right, it's okay that they want to cut ties, because I have been criticizing the main leader who I've been working with for close to 10 years, right? But it's not okay to cut ties and connect me to white extremists and the very far political right. And that's sort of like the main thing. So what do? Do you take on the fight? Because, Tom, I have to tell you, this was clearly a threat to me. Because they informed everyone, but they didn't inform about the extremism, I think. So the threat was very real. If you do something about this, if you talk about this or anything like that, they're going to put that tag on you, and then you'll never be able to work anywhere because you'll be
very, very sinister, very, very unpleasant behavior. I'm very sorry to hear that you've endured this, and I'm sorry to hear that this kind of climate exists in modern academia.
Yeah. It's all because of you, Tom.
Well, I don't know why I experience this kind of thing as well. Like I just make videos about history. Occasionally I make videos about religion and stuff with a little bit of philosophy. I don't say anything particularly political. I have I'm socially conservative, so I guess you could say that's right wing, but I don't have any particularly economic right wing ideas. I don't really talk about my beliefs a great deal, but they really, really make a great effort to try and silence me. And I don't even say anything that diverges from what the latest studies have shown. I just help people to understand what is being said. So it's very peculiar indeed that such powerful forces, like Google, have shadow banned 2 of my videos recently. They deny that they did it. But
Skyfather, right?
The Skyfather one, and another one about the findings from from the New Grange paper about Neolithic Ireland. So there was nothing in either of those videos that was remotely controversial, either academically or politically. But so why did they shadow ban them? It's very peculiar, and it's part of a very worrying trend in the direction of academia and social media and the internet and politics in general that we're seeing. And the only way it could ever possibly change is if people like you, Sturla, actually stand up against it. And I'm very pleased to see that that's what you've done, and you've successfully argued your case in the media. And I hope that everyone who read it.
That's the thing. I had to decide what am I going to do about it. It's not very in my character or nature to shut my mouth and just move on and fold my cards, basically, as basically my profession. I felt I was being bullied, and there's a word for it in Scandinavia. It's called hersketeknikker. When you're being bullied in that sense that you can draw that card, a victimized card, and say, hey, you can't talk to me like that, But it's not like that, I feel. It's either you take it, and then you shut your mouth and you move on, or you don't take it. You don't accept to be treated that way, and then you do something with it, right? And that's more akin to my nature, and it's more in the Viking spirit, I felt. So I said, all right, I'll take him on. He's one of the most famous scientists in Denmark, and I feel as long as I don't go at him, as long as I stick to the science, I should be fine, because there I felt I was standing really firmly, because there are 2 things that I have problems with the way the paper has been communicated with the journalists, and it's all got to do with a bias. There's a bias in the data set in Sweden, and there's a bias in the data set in Norway. But
the data set is not a political or intentional bias, right? It was just from a lack of samples in Sweden, right?
For example, you have a lot of comparisons in the paper between Danish Vikings and Vikings in England, and also Swedish Vikings and Vikings in England, actually. But when it comes to the north of England, and especially the northwest, there are very few samples. There are some in Ireland, and in Scotland, almost none, except for up north, very far north. And in Norway, where every Norwegian knows that most of the Vikings came from the western coast, closest to England, right? All along the coast from Trondheim down and around and up to Oslo. That's a really long coastline. And of course, people sailed out there all the time. We have so many sources and know so much about how they would travel and settle, and everywhere they went. This is like a highway for us. Right here where I live, you can go out on the ocean, and in no time you're over on the Orkney Isles, and down in the Hebrides, and down to the Irish Sea, and down to Normandy. It's like a highway. It's not the boundary. It's a highway, right? So to have no samples from that whole large area, and then to talk about that there are only Vikings. There were only Vikings in the south of Sweden, on Gotland and Åland, and in Denmark, and the rest of Scandinavia were farmers. And it's just so silly.
The runestones paint a very different story. The Swedish runestones.
Yeah.
There's runestones all over the country talking about, you know, this chap went to England, this chap went to Russia or Sirkland or whatever. So the Swedes obviously were going a Viking all over the world. So it just can't possibly be true to say the Swedes weren't raiders as well. There were definitely raiding parties leaving from Sweden. All the sources indicate that to be the case.
And the thing is, Tom, my criticism was actually quite light. I only stated basically that this should have been mentioned. When you say things about the paper, and if you want to speculate, if you want to put things a little bit up there so you can get some good headlines and maybe some front pages on New York Times or CNN, at least mention in a small sentence that we need more data for most of Norway, for example, for most of the British Isles. So we're looking forward to future studies on this, to continue this research, something like that. That would have solved everything. Instead, the opposite happens, you know, and suddenly people get so angry. And this is the reaction that made me react, because some people were upset and felt there was some kind of politicization in the whole thing. And this causes polarization, Tom. We don't need more polarization in our world today. So my attempt was to sort of calm things down, and that's what I say in my own on my own YouTube channel on Viking Stories. We got to mention that, by the way.
Oh yes, everybody check out Viking Stories. The link is in the description. If you click it, it's a clickable link in the description. Excellent channel.
Well, yeah, because that's how I tackled this. I first went to this large paper in Denmark. They wrote a story, and that story was very good because Eske Willerslev actually ended up retracting some of the worst accusations, right? But I had to go to the media to do this. And in addition, because I was sure that he and his spin doctors or someone around in his team wanted to attack me personally. So to avoid this, I made this video on Friday on my YouTube channel, and it was called something like cancel the deplatformed what next on Viking Stories. And it, well, to me, 10,000 views is a lot. And I've had that now in 4 days. And the thing is, I have so many comments there. Everyone is positive, not even one hater. And I'm so humble and grateful to the great amount of support and people telling me to, you know, stick it to him. And I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stick to the science, because that's, as long as I do that, I think I'm in the clear. And he knows in Copenhagen, and Eske, if you're watching this, you should know that everything you try that goes on me, because he retracted the worst accusation, but he replaced them with some other accusations. He's calling me dishonest. He's saying I got a bad style and some other stuff. Which and
he didn't like your Man of War shirt.
Yeah, but it's easy to miss this. But he retracts these horrible accusations that I'm an extremist and replaces them with some milder slander or
more personal.
Yeah, well, if you had lived 200 years ago or 1,000 years ago, we would have been in the Holmgang for sure. So
let's not go into personal stuff. Let's return to the.
I just wanted to say, anything he throws at me now is going to be amplified through my own YouTube channel, and I don't think he has he expected that. But that's turning it around in a sense that sure, you can continue attacking me as a person, but I'll just pass it on and have full transparency here now. and then suddenly has 10,000 or 100,000 people, and on your channel also to relate to, and they hate bad PR. Of course they do. So I don't think they know what they're going to do, but I'm expecting some blowback, and I'm sure it's coming. All right. So yeah, and for me being back on your channel, I think that's something that they would see as provocative. Absolutely. So I might get a backlash tomorrow or the day after, but I have prepared. I am prepared. I'm not giving up this fight.
I think it's admirable that you do that, and I hope that any other people who work in academia or media or any fields where they're put under similar pressure that Sturla has been will follow his example and fight against this worrying trend. But I'd like to ask you a bit more with the second half of the stream. Now we're halfway through, about some of the aspects of the paper that we didn't have a chance to go over before in detail. We talked about the blondism, but what about the Southern European stuff? The fact that there was Southern European DNA in the Viking era was quite shocking, and there was also some alleged Viking related samples or Viking linked samples from Italy, weren't there? Should we talk about that a bit? I've got some of the stuff from some images to bring up on screen as we do it.
Normally I wouldn't be able to talk about that because I was part of the study, I was part of the team, and I was part of the well, I'm a co-author, right? So it would be a sort of unethical to criticize a paper I've signed on to. But now I'm out. But I don't want to do that either because of respect of the other researchers, because they are truly great researchers behind there, some of the best people I've worked with. So let me just start by saying that. Is this the 5 Italian?
So these are the 5 samples from Foggia in Italy.
Can you get it a bit larger? Is it possible? Or
yeah, let me see how big I can get it. The problem is that it's long. That's the problem. Well, what we've got here is these are the sample names, and then you can see that they're all medieval from the 12th to 13th centuries, which is after the Viking era. That doesn't
11th to 13th century.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, 11th. This one is Viking era. The first one is 11th to 13th. That could be 1040, which is within the Viking era. And there's 3 males and 2 females. And the male haplogroups here are 2 of them have R1b subclades, and one of the male has an L1.
No, that's probably an error. It should be I1.
I1. Ah, that's definitely a Viking.
Certain that's I1.
I was wondering if my friend was talking to him, like he was asking me about L1. I said, I actually had never heard of that haplogroup. I don't know.
I'm sure it's I1. But the funny part is we can start by that one. I1A, 1B. And that's actually my own Y chromosome haplogroup. It's a Scandinavian one. It's the one that's called P109, which is a I'm part of this group on I can't remember the website now, but there are a lot of people who are on the same P109, and it's quite an interesting group. It's the same as if I'm not mistaken, the Prince Albert II of Monaco, the Grimaldis, actually have that also. It's a typical one from Scandinavia. I've
got that too. I1. But so these guys, these you think are Normans, right? Because they have some Scandinavian admixture, but it's quite late for Viking era. It's more like Norman times, and they're buried in 2 churches. These 5 samples are from 2 churches, right?
Yeah. The thing is, the paper mentions Normans. But Normans regarding the high percentage of Italian DNA in the UK population, right? That's one of the results. I can't remember. Percentage was quite high, actually, more than 9%.
They claimed that Britons have between 9 and 18% Italian admixture, which no one has ever claimed in any other paper. And I obviously I'm not involved in the paper, so I don't mind criticizing it. But I'm not a geneticist, so I can't, I can't really go against what experts saying and expect anyone to believe me. But I've seen a lot of experts counter signal that claim, saying that there's certainly no evidence of such a high amount of Italian admixture in Britain. Obviously, if British people were that as much as 18% Italian, then they would plot further south like French people and on a PCA. And I think that it was based on what they base these figures on chroma painting, and some people think they went a bit overboard with that and to make these kind of claims. So that's what I've heard other people say. I don't know if what that signal is that they're talking about.
Let me say this. In retrospect, I probably should have been more vocal before publication on this part, because I happen to know quite a lot about the Norman activities in southern Italy, and they were quite massive. There's a map if you want to see how the Norman conquest of Italy. You can see how the Longobards, who themselves were from Scandinavia, right? You can see how the duchies, the Longobar duchies around in Italy were, because the ones who conquered Italy after the fall of the Roman Empire, that was the Goths, right? The Ostrogoths. But they didn't last so long because they fought so much with the Byzantines, right? But the Longobards, who became the Lombards, they had control over all of Italy except for Sicily, and they hired Norman mercenaries to come in and help them oust the Muslims out of Sicily. However, the Normans became so powerful with the mercenary army that they, especially these Guiscard brothers, Robert Guiscard, for example, which is an important person in this aspect, they took control, and then not only took control over Sicily, but all of southern Italy up to Rome, actually. And they created the two kingdoms of Sicilia and Apulia, especially this one Norman family. And Roger II of Sicily, he was a Norman, and he was the son of Roger I, of course, but there were 9 brothers. So imagine this: you have this mercenary family of brothers coming from Normandy down to Sicily. They probably were new arrivals in Normandy, but we don't know. It's a little bit mythical about their origins back to Scandinavia. But they became kings in just one generation. And Roger II was a king of these two, of Sicily, and his daughter, who lived for a long time, she married the son of Frederick Barbarossa, and their son again, Frederick II. He was a German Roman Empire, but he settled not in the north of Europe. He settled in Sicily. And here's my point: Foggia was a very special place to him, right? To the Normans, but especially to Frederick II. This is in the 13th century, and so when he drained out the swamp there, he really did a lot of fortifications there. I'm sure there were a lot of Norman soldiers in this area. There's no doubt about that. This was also a duchy from the Longobards, and we know the Normans and the Longobards, they would mix also for 200-300 years. We know this, right? So all the way from Robert Guiscard in the 1050s, 1060s, he was the first one who made Foggia, this area where those 5 samples are from, into a Norman area in the 1050s, 1050s and 1060s, right? And it stayed a cherished place for Normans until Frederick II, 200 years later, right?
That explains why these samples were identified as being Viking related. Then they must have had some. It was only about 100 years after that, so that some of them have got some of that lingering Scandinavian ancestry, no doubt.
No doubt. And that's probably why one of those 5 have the same Scandinavian Y chromosome that I myself have, and that's undoubtedly why these Italian samples are marked with such a high percentage in the UK. And I have to say,
wait, how is that related to the people in the UK? Because they haven't got well, I don't know. They haven't got any Norman samples from the UK, right? What they're talking about was
this is the actually I can't remember if they did modern day British citizens and compare that with the Italian samples.
I think they're talking about modern British.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
My personal belief is that this signal of southern DNA, if it exists, is more likely from like a lot of French interactions over the Middle Ages and people coming from France, and also even in the industrial revolution, we had workers coming from Italy in not insignificant numbers, but not in huge numbers. Certainly not enough to justify 18% Italian. I just don't think that ever happened. And even the Normans wouldn't. I don't think the Normans would plot like Italians. I'd like to see what a Norman from Normandy would actually look like in terms of admixture proportions, because some people say, oh, they were mostly French, and others would say, no, they were pretty much still Vikings, and that hasn't been fully resolved yet. Whereas early Lombards have been looked at in cemeteries in Italy and Hungary, not in this paper, but in a different one, and they were found to be pretty much like Swedes. So they were really, really Nordic still, even as far south as Italy. So
yeah, those are good papers. I really like the way they have worked there, especially in the cross-disciplinary. The papers that they mentioned there on the Lombards or Longobards, I mean. But Tom, I think this is much more easier. I think it's all got to do with the data set, and it's the same situation that we have in Norway and in Sweden with the biased data set. And I should take some criticism there, because I should have been more vocal internally and told everyone about how this region of Foggia, where these 5 samples are from, because these are the samples in question, right? And there's no doubt in my mind that these Normans had stayed in that area for 2 centuries, or maybe they were new arrivals, but we know they worked a lot in this area, building Foggia, the Normans. And of course, there were soldiers there. And of course, they interbred with locals. And the locals, mind you, had for centuries been Longobards themselves, right? So, and we find in the paper also links between Longobards, and Sweden and Norway and Scandinavia, right? So it's all very tight. But to call these 5 samples Italians, that's something that maybe should have been a little bit changed. Yeah.
That sounds interesting. I would like to hear more about it. But I wanted to also hear you say you wanted to say something about the migration era influence of the DNA not mentioned, and that we talked about before. Was that your explanation for the southern DNA influx into the Viking era? Scandinavia was to be explained by returning migration era tribes. So before the Viking era, there was an influx of what's associated with southern European ancestry, which means Neolithic Anatolian farmer DNA. And your explanation, which I thought was very compelling, was that was Germanic tribes who had, during the migration era, gone south and kept ties with the north and brought some, maybe they'd intermixed with some southern peoples and then come back up north and brought with it some southern DNA. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, that's my personal opinion. That's a theory, a hypothesis that we discussed internally. And I felt, but I see that Eske Willerslev has contradicted this in retrospect. But I felt all the archaeologists and historians were on the same side here. And that was actually supposed to be a PhD project for me on the next project that I was a part of up until recently, to find out about this. Because we see, Tom, there's a pattern here. We see everywhere people went out to Scandinavia. You can look at the Normans, you can look at the Russians, the Rus Vikings, and you can look at even back in the 5th and 6th century in Iberia, Spain and Portugal, right? With the Visigoths and how they had their own laws for themselves, for the Goths, and for everyone else, they had Roman laws. But whenever they came to an area, they were a minority, and the way to take control over a small area was to marry into the local aristocracy. Right? And the Visigoths, the Code of Uruk, it's called the Law Code, is a very good example because you know the term sangria azul, blue blood.
Blue blood, yes. They used to hold up their arms and show the veins.
Well, it's a theory, this also, but I think it's a sound theory. It's from that time. Sangria azul comes from Spanish, and it's got to do with these northern people who came down and married into the local aristocracy. They were at the top of society, right? And if you wanted to climb up, you had to have that sangria azul. Everyone dreamed about the blue bloods and everything. And the aristocracy, the local aristocracy for centuries after in Catalonia and in the Madrid area, they were all of Visigothic origin, right? But we see the same thing everywhere they settled. And Normandy is a very good example. But they come as a minority, they marry into the local aristocracy. After 100 years both in Normandy and in Spain, present-day Spain, they change their language and start speaking local language, and they change their names, right? Erik or Aurik becomes Pelayo 100 years or 200 years later, 150 years later, right? Pelayo was like the first Visigothic nobleman who started the reconquest of Spain, right? But same in Normandy also. There you have Arnulf and Ragnvald and all this. And 100 years later, in 1018, they didn't speak Norse anymore, but they sent their sons to Bayeux to learn the Norse tongue, to learn how to speak Norse, right? So it was still important to know the Norse tongue in the year 1018.
Wow.
And that's only 100 years later, right? Since they first came, the first ones.
That's several generations in those days as well, because they had children by the time they were 20. So 100 years means you're talking several generations. They're still,
So the thing is, you see the same pattern also in Russia with the Rus Vikings, you know, and there you have the Valdemar and all these names, Yaroslav and all this, that they all had Norse names, right? And 100 years later, they're becoming local. And there's this pattern we see every place around, and it's quite interesting and unique, and I think relevant in this case also, because this pattern here is something that they were always obviously very aware of. They had a long memory and talked about endeavors centuries before.
It's kind of, Viking Age was kind of like a repeat of the migration era in many ways of that strategy. Got a couple of questions from the audience. One from Nate the Ape asks you, does Sturla have any book recommendations for the layman to learn about the Viking Age and pre-Viking Age, Scandinavia, I presume he means by pre-Viking Age?
Oh, well, yes. Yes, I both do and I don't. I was looking forward to reading Neil Price. He's got a new book, Between the Ash and the Elm or something like that it's called. But I've seen it has gotten a lot of criticism, actually. So to my understanding, the first part, the first 3-4 chapters is really good, but then it's kind of, I guess, a little bit off from the people that I listen to a little bit to hear how. So I'm not so certain, but maybe we can, if I can come up with some book titles and we can put that on later on. Is that a possibility?
Sure. Joe Serrano just says, very interesting listening to Sturla. Another chap asked earlier, a question that's come up maybe 3 or 4 times on the stream. I'm going to say it again. He asked me about Bock Saga. It's fake. It's fake. I'm going to tell you a million times it's fake. Bock was a charlatan, and he was trying to get people to do very strange things in his crazy little sex cult in Finland. I can't believe anyone seriously believes in it. It's not a real. It's not a real thing. What I wanted to also talk about, which we didn't talk about last time, and I find personally really interesting, is the transition in Scandinavia from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age and then the Viking Age. There is a lot of continuity. We talked about last time that actually surprising continuity, but not total continuity. There is some population shuffling going on. And what they describe in the paper is that the Bronze Age Scandinavians had more southerly ancestry, more Neolithic, what we call early European farmer ancestry, than in the Iron Age. So there's a higher step component. Something is bringing more step DNA into Iron Age Scandinavia, so that they become more step. And then in the Viking Age, that goes back more a bit southern shifted again. So you get, like we talked about, something happens that brings more Anatolian associated ancestry, which may be these returning migratory tribes. But what do you think is the source of, or the reason for, the increase in step related ancestry going from the Nordic Bronze Age into the Iron Age?
Well, yeah, I got many answers to that, and I'll choose the, I don't want to speculate too much, because I know at the moment, and I want to reassure you and everyone else who's interested in this particular topic, right now there's a huge project, which I was part of, gathering such a large number of relevant Bronze Age material and also Iron Age material, and it's all going to be compared, and then we'll know the answers for sure. It's a little bit too early to speculate, but if I were to speculate, I would say trade probably has a lot to do with it, because we see also in the Viking paper that wherever there was trading routes, you also see a more mix of peoples, and this is natural, of course, right? And I don't think people realize how rich as a region Scandinavia was in the Nordic Bronze Age, 3,000, 3,500 years ago.
So a lot of gold in things like Hårga Mound. Hårga Mound had a lot of gold in it. So
yeah. And the thing is, there were so many things to trade in Scandinavia. But in Scandinavia, they had to get to make the bronze, right? They had to trade with people in Cornwall, right? And they had to trade with people who had the mines, not only in Cornwall, but also in Austria, and then later on in Italy. And we know, and this is mentioned in the Viking paper also, that the Minoan Greeks had a strong connection with Scandinavia for some reason during this rich Nordic Bronze Age. But then after the Bronze Age collapse, which lasted for a little time, right? So we have discontinuity there. And then when the Iron Age starts, then something else happens. Because then Scandinavia had all this iron bogs, right? So suddenly we didn't need these large, extensive trade networks. In the Bronze Age, we see that daughters were sent up to 350 kilometers away when they were married off into other clans. 350 kilometers, that's a far away, just to maintain the extensive trade regions that they had, right? And imagine that, sending your daughter 350 kilometers away. This is why this I can say as a historian, you know the word gift, and to get married in Scandinavian, or gifte seg, gift, it's the same word. And this comes from that time. Also to take poison, by the way, but that's another story. But rest assured, the thing is, the transition here has to do with when we came into the Iron Age in Scandinavia, we became self-dependent. Can you say that? Is that a good word?
Independent.
Independent. Yeah, well, it's self-sufficient, I mean.
Yeah, self-sufficient. Yeah.
Yeah, with iron, right? So we didn't need extensive trade networks. Suddenly we can make all the metal and all the weapons and all the tools ourselves because we had everything. And we had a lot of wood also. We needed to heat up and to make iron, right? So after the Bronze Age collapse, and when they entered the Iron Age, there was massive disruption in trade. And we see from the spread of Germanic languages, if you go on Wikipedia and check out the maps there, you can see how the Germanic languages that became German, for example, how it came out of Scandinavia just in this early Iron Age. And it's quite remarkable to see how all these Germanic-speaking tribes actually originated up in Scandinavia and came out during this time. And this is because they had a surplus of goods to trade with and iron, right? That's a pretty good advantage. And then when the Romans became larger, you started having the amber trade route. If you Google that or go on Wikipedia and you see the amber road going from the Baltic down to the Roman Empire, it wasn't all the amber who went down there. It was a lot of other stuff, and it came down from even up far in Norway, where we had this tusk and all
Walrus ivory.
yeah. And it was so valuable, and wool was extremely valuable also. So we had this large production, and we know there was trade, and where there was trade, there was a mix of peoples, right? So I think that's the answer, and that's as far as we know at the moment. And if we are to speculate, maybe we'll have the same situation over, not we, because I'm out of this project, but the same discussion, as I mentioned previously, on the phenotypes and the selection part. It's quite astonishing when it comes to the blondness, for example. If you see the Eastern hunter-gatherers that came into Scandinavia from the north about 10,000 years ago, we have so little left because there were so few people, and the people who came after, the Neolithic, the farmers, and then the Europeans, there were so many more, right? But even though the blondness that they had, we still have today, and it's growing, there's a selection for it, right? And this is difficult for many to talk about. I don't know why, because you should be, because it's science. And as was said, you should never avoid mentioning scientific facts for political reasons. I agree with that. But we don't have much from these Eastern hunter-gatherers. I can grant you that. This is just purely out of statistics, right? But
yeah,
some genes, right?
We have to just specify that the Scandinavians don't have much left from those Eastern hunter-gatherers, but Scandinavians do have a significant amount of Eastern hunter-gatherer DNA from Indo-European peoples who came from a different direction later in the Bronze Age, like in the corded were-related people who were themselves like 60% Eastern hunter-gatherer or something like that. So I think modern Scandinavians are something like 30-40% Eastern hunter-gatherer. I can't remember what it is, but that isn't from the original Eastern hunter-gatherer influx that came in through Siberia in the 10,000 years ago that Sturla was talking about.
Yeah, because and you said Siberia there. I'm not sure they came that far east. And when we say Eastern hunter-gatherers that you mentioned there, and the Eastern hunter-gatherers that I'm talking about 10,000 years ago, I actually think those are very different people, especially genetically. I think those that came with this blondness, that they may have been, there's a theory on the Ice Age refuge down in the Ukraine, that they stayed there for a long period of time. This is something that we don't know yet, but it's still being worked on.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it is, absolutely. And the reason is, I mean, they came first up north and then over. If you look on the map, it's like you go all the way up to Scandinavia and then come down, right? And then you mix with the people who were there. Those were the ones who had blue eyes, and it's a really strange period of time. And we know the people who came from the north, they also used tools, hunting tools, and made really advanced tools that were much better than what the ones had who came from the south, the Western hunter-gatherers. And this has also something to do maybe with why they mixed together as a people.
Mixing skills.
Yeah, and this whole, what we're talking about now, I mean, we've been through so many thousands of years, and we're talking about so many different migrations in all different ways, and people have mixed so much. I think it's a really crazy story. But something happened, definitely in the Bronze Age, and in the Iron Age, in the early Iron Age. And we don't know everything about that yet.
I wonder whether the Iron Age resurgence of increase in step DNA may be related to, I don't know, really. I have no idea, but I'm guessing it could be either related to some kind of interactions with Baltic people who have maybe a bit more, because I know that in Gotland, the Nordic Bronze Age is very similar to the Lithuanian stuff. So Gotland was kind of like halfway between Scandinavia and Lithuania and kinds of things. So it could be that, or it could be that it's a more southerly source, and some of these steppe peoples are actually making contact with some Iron Age steppe peoples were interacting with Scandinavians. By that I mean maybe Scythians, because we know that Germanic art is certainly influenced by Scythian art somehow. So there could be that.
Yeah, the ornamentics, the animal shapes and everything, you mean?
Yeah. So I don't know. But
I've been
that's
wondering,
something I'd like to know.
Maybe I can ask you. You mentioned that you're I1 in your Y chromosome, right?
Yes.
And you got such an interest for the Indo-Europeans. Wouldn't that be a different direction from your paternal line?
Well, that's something I'd like to know, because where does I1 come from? So at the moment, as far as I'm aware, I1 is associated very much with the Nordic Bronze Age, which was an Indo-European culture. But it's also found in apparently, someone told me today, the oldest sample is actually pre-Nordic Bronze Age, found in Sweden in a corded ware backlash culture sample. So where did it come from? Did it come from these indigenous hunter-gatherers in Scandinavia, or did it get brought into Scandinavia from the south, either by Neolithic farmer types or by Indo-Europeans who picked it up from non-Indo-European people in Central Europe, like Western hunter-gatherers? So
obviously, it would have been the women who picked up the men and went north.
Yes, it's a big something like that. Maybe the Indo-European women were very attracted to the native hunter-gatherer men, and that's how I1 became a dominant lineage. I don't know. I find it very interesting.
The I1 that yourself are and myself.
Yeah. I get it. I think from Normans, because my surname is French, Roussel. So it's probably a Norman who got it from Scandinavia.
Probably it's like Fitzpatrick. Fitz between that's the son of Patrick, right? It's a Norman name, but it's of course from the Norman times. But what about haplogroup I2 then? Because I2 is prevalent in the south of Europe. Isn't that an indication that I would have come from the south?
I don't know. I mean, I know that I2 is definitely Western hunter-gatherers, and I did a video. This video that got shadow banned by Google. I talked a lot about I2, not the Skyfather one, the other one, the one about megalithic Ireland and Scotland and England, and that is because the people who built all these Stonehenge and all these lovely stone structures from the Neolithic in Britain and Ireland, they were almost all I2 haplogroup holders. But they got those haplogroups from the previous inhabitants, the indigenous hunter-gatherers, who they interbred with. But they didn't have very much DNA from those hunter-gatherers. But just the male lines dominated. Of a very small minority of indigenous hunter-gatherers somehow managed to dominate the paternal lineages of the invading Anatolian-derived farmers, which is fascinating, I think. But today, that's not very common in Britain or Ireland. It's got replaced by R1b mainly. But down south in the Balkans, there's still quite a fair bit of I2 lineages as well. So that's quite interesting.
So if I can land this, because I see we're sort of like up on time soon. I read this really fascinating paper, but first, you mentioned the R1b coming into the British Isles. And what is fascinating there is that it's the percentage of men who disappeared in a very short period of time, or the ones who were there before the R1b came. I think the percentage is 90 or 93 or something of all the men disappearing and being replaced by these Indo-European arrivals, right?
Yeah.
The fascinating study I read, it's 2 years ago, I think. I can send it to you. There are actually two studies from on Iberia, Spain and Portugal, right?
Yeah.
And you can see one is you can see the migration area and the reconquest of Spain, how people would move from the north and down south, the way the reconquest of Spain actually went with the Visigothic nobility. But the earlier paper is regarding the replacements, and it's close to 100%. So all the men disappeared, right?
Yeah, it was something very brutal, I think, occurred in Iberia, and probably in Britain too. So both in Britain and in Iberia, you have roughly the same time occurring with bell beaker related people coming in and replacing a lot of the population in quite a short amount of time. So that could be plague related.
then I got a question for you, because that did not happen in Scandinavia.
No, it
right?
didn't. No.
Yeah. And why is that? And that's an interesting question.
That is an interesting question. Yeah, it is. And also that why is it that the Nordic Bronze Age they have more southern ancestry, more southerly shifted, more Anatolian ancestry than the invading corded ware people who preceded the Nordic Bronze Age, the first Indo-Europeans in Scandinavia. They were more step shifted. And then it goes down, it goes more south shifted, and then it goes back step shifted again during the Iron Age. Very interesting phenomena. I'd like to know, hear some stories that some experts can use to explain these findings.
Yeah, and I can tell you, Tom, as I tried to state now in the past 2-3 videos on my own YouTube channel, now that I'm out of the great research scientific community in Copenhagen, it has been a pleasure. I was there for close to 10 years. I got a lot of DNA. I didn't get a penny, actually, from it either. But it was rewarding, and it was good for my career up until I came to your channel, of course. But what I'm thinking is, in 2 years' time, the papers will come on this great Bronze Age and Iron Age project. We see now some of these archaeologists who are leading and are part in this project that I have just been cut out of. We see that they are saying, what we see now is that the clan culture and the warrior society, and especially the clan culture in the start of the Viking Age, goes back into the Iron Age much further back in time than what we actually imagined just a few years ago. And this was actually on Swedish TV just 1.5 years ago, also by this archaeologist I'm talking about, Christian Christensen. And he's saying that we even see traces going all the way back to the Bronze Age. There's a continuity here in the way the culture was, in the way the society was, which is, I think we need anthropologists on this team, in addition to not just geneticists and archaeologists and historians like myself, but there is something that goes really far back in time. And they're working with linguistic, and that's important in this also. So I think we'll know all this that we're speculating now on in just a couple of years once these papers come out. And I know there's a huge paper in Sweden, huge project, sorry, in Sweden that's concerning the same thing also. And it's extremely exciting. And I'm telling you, before I got on your channel, this was very exciting to be a part of too.
I'm sorry to hear that you weren't direct, but I really hope that you will be again picked up and for your expertise to collaborate with some other university, or that you'll be able to carry on working in providing your valuable insights into the interpretation of this kind of DNA, because I find it's really fascinating stuff that's going on now, and I don't want it all to be colored by a if they get everyone in the team with the same views, then they don't have a full diverse set of opinions. They'll limit what their ability to interpret evidence.
Yeah, and I've been trying to point this out now, that we should be able to talk to each other, and like me coming on your channel now again, and finding out what the fuss is all about, right? And we can talk back and forth like we do now. We can discuss things. We can agree and disagree. We can agree to disagree. That's how we move forward. That's my whole point. And that's why I wanted to meet you again and talk about these things, talk about this paper, because what I've experienced since I was last on your channel just a few weeks ago is a sort of, if people only want to talk to other people that they agree with, what's there really to talk about? And this is something, I mean, all of you viewers who are watching this also, I hope you can join me. Is that okay to say, Tom, on my channel about this also? I'm raising these questions, and I'm not finished with the Danes, because I don't think they're finished with me. And I'm sure there's going to be a reaction from just being on your channel, even though they probably haven't bothered even to hear what we have been talking about.
Well, I hope that whatever happens, I hope that that people continue to work with you, and that many people benefit from your work. And I hope that your channel grows, and that everyone listening here will take a little look in the description and click on Viking Stories, and go and subscribe to Sturla's channel so that you can get updates from him on whatever he'll be working on in the future in Georgia and elsewhere. Yeah, I think this has been a really interesting stream, and great to hear your takes on the paper. That much more interesting and insightful than anything the mainstream media did on the paper. Yeah, thank you once more, Sturla, and you're welcome back in the future anytime you'd like to discuss anything else.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And I have to say, I was a little bit afraid coming on here because there were so many people who told me that you're quite the extremist, but I didn't find so much extreme things about you, because I found our talk very productive and quite interesting as well. So thanks.
Well, I think the term extremist is completely overused, because I meet a lot of people. Extremist is someone whose views don't match up with what everyone else thinks. And I go to pubs, drink with all kinds of people, and generally I find that the average bloke thinks exactly what I think on most issues. So I mean, except for my religion, which is paganism, and there aren't so many pagans around. But that's about the only thing that's extraordinary about me or unusual is my religion. But obviously, the people who in power in the media and things they're the extremists, in my opinion, because they have views that most people don't agree with, but they keep them secret, and they use media to try and manipulate other people to think like them. And then if anyone disagrees with them or speaks out against it, they call them an extremist. But it's nonsense. It's a propaganda technique.
If I can say one thing, then, in this example with our story here, which for my sake hasn't finished yet, though, so mind you, but the media has been to both of us help here. I was not able to get an answer from Eske Willerslev in Copenhagen. I wrote him several emails, and even now it's gone more than 30 days since I've heard from him. And I've asked questions. What is the accusations here for Tom Roswell and Survive the Jive? I didn't get a reply. The only way to get a reply was to go to a journalist who made a big story about it, and that has been to our advantage. But it's horrible in our day and our time that when facing these accusations, the only way is to go head on, strong, and go all out public. And even then, I mean, it's such a huge risk. Most of my smart friends said, don't do it, Sturla. It's not worth it. You know, move on and just accept that you've been treated very badly by someone who's been very arrogant and pompous, probably also. Move on. It's much better. But, you know, I'm not built that way. And I like it in a storm.
There's got to be someone sometime who says no to this kind of thing. So, sorry it had to be you.
Your head out like you do, Tom, isn't it? It's kind of hard to stick your head out. I'm getting a little scared.
You stuck your head out. You can't put it back in again, really, because then there's only so much. I've had this talk. I don't understand what the intention is. What is the expectation that excluding me from is going to result in? That I'm going to just disappear? It'll make me fight harder against people like that. So if they keep lying about me, they think I'll accept the lies. I will continue to oppose lies. It doesn't.
To me, Tom, you're like that person that everyone knows who's always been in rough relationships, and he's got kids with different mothers, and anytime you're having problems with your girlfriend, you just go talk to that guy. He's always, I mean, he's been through it all, and then you say, oh, okay, his problems are much worse, so I'll stick with my girlfriend. I won't break up with her because, you know, it's better with a safer scenario. And I don't think I want my channel to grow anymore. I think 10,000 followers is wonderful. If I get on to your level, I fear I'm sticking my head too much out. and I'll get all these crazy accusations. I had one hater in the past 2 weeks. One hater. Imagine that.
That's not so much. Well, yeah, the small channels is more cozy and intimate relationship with the audience. You certainly, I think, you shouldn't restrict yourself to YouTube. I hope that you'll be continue to work in academia And I hope that your insights will be of use to genetic projects in universities in different countries in future.
Thanks. Yeah, I have some ambitions, but I've just started now to look forward again, and I'm walking very well. I'm standing firm, I have to say that, but I'm expecting an attack, not just from one person, from one professor, but from a whole team of spin doctors and PR advisors. And the only thing I can do against that is to have a group of followers or audience or a clan, so to say. And that's what I have now. 10,000 man strong clan, men and women. And anything they throw at me, I'll just give it straight out, amplify it out to the world, and let's see what they bring on.
Good man for fighting. I respect that. Thank you very much for joining me, Sturla. Good night, everyone. This has been Jive Talk. I'll see you next time.